Hello, everyone. I've made an enormous mistake, and I'm not even sure where it all began or when I allowed myself to act so foolishly driven by desire. I've shattered my once happy marriage due to my lustful impulses, and I'm utterly lost in this situation. It all unraveled so rapidly like a blur, and I'm consumed by shame. I've committed something truly reprehensible, and I can't even face myself in the mirror right now. I doubt I'll ever be able to forgive myself for engaging in an affair and betraying my husband. I hold myself responsible for every aspect of this situation. My unchecked lust carried me away, and I'm in a state of confusion and despair. However, I hope that by sharing my story here, someone else might gain some insight. I've single-handedly destroyed my marriage in pursuit of fleeting pleasure with a younger person. My children won't even look at me or talk to me in the same way as other family members. My husband no longer desires me and is seeking a divorce. Now, you may be curious about what led to all of this, so let me start with some background information. I'm Fiona, a 45-year-old woman, and my husband Victor is a 47-year-old man. We've been married for 25 years and reside in Alabama, USA. Our 3 children are Ariel and Arthur, who are 23-year-old twins, and Skylar, a 19-year-old. Victor and I were high school sweethearts who tied the knot a few years after graduating from high school. Back in school, Victor was the star quarterback, while I was the nerdy girl who frequently faced bullying. That all changed when Victor came to my rescue and defended me against the bullies during my later high school years. High school was a challenging time. I was the outcast, always targeted by bullies, while Victor was the popular quarterback whom everyone adored. Unexpectedly, our paths crossed in the hallway, and Victor started spending time with me. It felt like something out of a teen movie. Despite our differences, Victor saw past the stereotypes and genuinely liked me for who I was. As we spent more time together, he became my protector, shielding me from the tormentors who had made my life a living hell. With Victor by my side, the bullying ceased. His presence was like a shield that deterred those bullies. I couldn't believe that the star quarterback had chosen to be with me, an ordinary girl trying to get by. Victor not only defended me, but also introduced me to a world where kindness held more value than cruelty. In his company, I found an unexpected ally, a friend, and eventually a husband. I can vividly recall our inaugural date. I was filled with excitement and nervousness as I anxiously awaited Victor's arrival for our first high school outing. At the time, I was 16 and he was on the cusp of turning 18, nearing the end of his high school journey. The atmosphere was a delightful blend of anticipation and jitters. When Victor eventually arrived, his cute, bashful smile instantly lifted my spirits. We embarked on our date with a leisurely stroll in the park, engaging in conversations where we exchanged embarrassing and comical secrets. Victor displayed a genuine interest in what I had to say, making me feel truly valued. He had a knack for making me feel significant. Seated on a bench, indulging in popcorn and witnessing the sunset, it felt like the beginning of something extraordinarily special. That initial high school date etched itself into my memory, an unforgettable moment. Our second high school date held a delightful surprise from Victor, a cool 2-seater bicycle which led to a joyous ride around town, our laughter filling the air like crazy. Following our biking escapade, Victor suggested a picnic. We discovered a lovely spot in the park, spread out a blanket, and savored homemade sandwiches and snacks. It was just the 2 of us, relishing delectable food and the uncomplicated pleasure of carefree teenage life. Sitting there, savoring each bite, I couldn't help but admire Victor's thoughtfulness. Our second date was all about reveling in each other's company, forging another cherished memory during our high school years. For our third high school date, Victor introduced me to an incredible hidden gem he held dear. We ventured into tranquil trails, escaping the commotion and chaos of school until we stumbled upon his secluded sanctuary. Enveloped by nature, it felt like our own serene retreat. Victor shared the significance of this place, turning it into our personal haven. Lounging in his cherished hideaway, I could see the depth of Victor's trust in me as he opened up about his special spot. In our early 20s, with Victor at 22 and me at 20, we made the decision to tie the knot. In fact, we were deeply immersed in planning our impending marriage. The burden of college expenses consistently weighed on our finances. Victor was diligently pursuing his medical studies with aspirations of becoming a surgeon, while I was passionately pursuing an art degree. Our dreams were grand, but our financial resources were limited. We would sit down, meticulously crunching numbers, striving to find a way to have a wedding without plunging into financial hardship. Many nights were dedicated to discussing our future, juggling our academic pursuits with the reality of becoming a married couple. It undeniably posed challenges to our financial stability, yet our youthful optimism and shared determination transformed these obstacles into stepping stones. On our significant day, Victor and I found ourselves within the quaint confines of a charming little church, surrounded by the familiar faces of close friends and family. The atmosphere was a blend of excitement and nerves, signifying the gravity of our commitment. As I walked down the aisle, emotions hit me with an intensity akin to a freight train. The simplicity of the church's setting didn't diminish the magnitude of the moment. Instead, it lent an air of authenticity and reality to our union. The church, adorned modestly, perfectly mirrored the essence of our love, uncomplicated yet profound. With our dearest loved ones in attendance, the palpable joy and support filled the air. Alongside the excitement, there were nerves, akin to a fluttering of butterflies in my stomach, entirely normal given the vows we were about to exchange. Standing there with Victor, gazing into his eyes, I felt a sense of tranquility. Our vows, while straightforward, radiated heartfelt sincerity, a testament to the love that had evolved from our high school days to this transformative moment. The post-wedding celebration was a joyous affair, marked by numerous toasts, laughter, and cherished moments with the individuals who had stood by us throughout our journey. Our wedding day may not have been a grand spectacle, but it was imbued with genuine emotions. Years later, we found ourselves in exceptionally promising positions. We successfully graduated, and Victor has since become a highly accomplished medical surgeon. I'd say we both have been quite successful. Victor's profession demands him to be on call and available at any time, regardless of the day or hour. This continuous commitment has begun to impact our relationship, as he scarcely has any time for me nowadays. As for me, despite earning my art degree, I decided to take on the role of a stay-at-home mom. Sam. I made this choice to be there for our children while Victor pursued his career. Furthermore, after Victor's father passed away, he inherited a substantial sum, so we never faced financial hardships. Our financial situation was secure, and Victor had taken precautions to ensure our stability in case he decided to retire, even though he didn't need to work. He continued working because of his dedication to his job and his love for it. Additionally, he had established trust and college funds for all our children, so overall we were in a very comfortable financial position. However, emotionally, it had been quite some time since Victor and I had the opportunity to spend quality time together or be intimate. Our marital life was strained due to his lack of time for me. In my desperation for any semblance of affection, I ended up being unfaithful. I crossed paths with Charles at a rather unexpected place, the grocery store of all places. After finishing my shopping for provisions and heading to check out, I literally bumped into him. It's amusing how it paralleled the way I had encountered my husband back in high school. Charles was a young man, seemingly only a few years older than our eldest children, Ariel and Arthur, and he possessed striking good looks. He extended an apology to me and offered his assistance in carrying my items to the checkout and then to my car, but I declined his help. Furthermore, he suggested covering the cost of my purchases, which I also turned down since the collision with him hadn't caused any harm to me or the items I had bought. Subsequently, I completed my checkout and departed, yet he continued to follow me. He introduced himself as Charles, and I reciprocated with my own name. It was evident that he was attempting to flirt with me, so I promptly disclosed my age, highlighting the significant age gap between us. Charles, however, expressed his admiration, stating that my beauty transcended age. I have received numerous compliments about my appearance, and people often comment on how youthful I look, which I attribute to my diligent skincare regimen and regular exercise. Hearing such praise from someone as young as Charles brought me a sense of joy. Additionally, due to the emotional disconnect between my husband and me as a result of his demanding job, I had been feeling starved for emotional attention, I responded with a smile and gratitude to Charles, but reiterated that I was a married woman. Charles assured me that he was fine with just being friends. Internally, I recognized this as a falsehood, and I should have chosen to leave at that moment. However, I cannot fathom what misguided and foolish reasoning led me to stay and share my phone number with Charles. Before I even reached home, he had already begun sending me text messages. Soon, Charles and I began communicating regularly. I suppose I did it because I was grappling with feelings of loneliness, compounded by the absence of our children who were away at college. Ariel and Arthur were both in college, and Skylar had also commenced his college journey after graduating from high school ahead of schedule. Did I mention that the kids were ardent admirers of their father? All three of them were pursuing careers in the medical field during their college years. It appeared they had inherited their father's intellect and hadn't inherited my penchant for creativity. Ariel was on her path to becoming a nurse, while both Arthur and Skylar were dedicated to the journey of becoming medical surgeons. Consequently, I often found myself alone at home, which resulted in profound loneliness. During this time, Charles and I engaged in extensive texting, occasionally laced with flirtatious undertones. I probably should have experienced pangs of guilt at that point, but I didn't, as I perceived it as harmless flirtation. I held on to the notion that what Victor didn't know wouldn't cause him any distress. Charles and I didn't share many common interests. He leaned more towards a musical inclination, whereas I had a strong affinity for the arts. Our cinematic tastes also diverged significantly, oddly drawing us closer together. It came to my attention that Charles was merely 24 years old, just a year older than Ariel and Arthur. Despite the guilt I felt, I imprudently continued down this path. Charles was resolute in persuading me to see things from his perspective. He suggested that if I were to watch some of his favorite movies, I might develop an appreciation for them as well. He exhibited empathy, lending a patient ear to my endless rants and conversations. Looking back, I can't help but recognize that Charles exhibited numerous warning signs, but my longing for attention blinded me to his true character. Charles maintained a facade, initially fostering trust, only to abandon me when challenges arose. His charismatic demeanor made it effortless for him to feign concern for me. Before long, I found myself grinning and chuckling more frequently, to a degree that drew the notice of my friends, my children, and even Victor. Each time they inquired, I resorted to falsehoods, asserting that I simply aimed to embrace life more fully. Untrue. Charles possessed a knack for making you feel like the most cherished person in his universe. He possessed an uncanny ability to delve deep into a person's heart and soul. Gradually, I began extending invitations to Charles when Victor was away, inviting him to join me for movie nights, during which we would engage in friendly debates over whose cinematic tastes reigned supreme. I was fully aware of the wrongdoing, yet I paid it no heed. Internally, I often tried to convince myself that my interactions with Charles amounted to nothing, even though I recognized their inevitable progression towards something more. Then, on a momentous day, Charles visited while Victor was absent. Victor had previously informed me of his late return, prompting Charles and me to plan an all-night movie marathon. Our intention was for Charles to depart in the early morning hours before Victor's expected arrival. Charles came over, and before long we were immersed in watching several movies on Netflix. I genuinely cannot fathom how it transpired, and I cannot even begin to explain it. It unfolded rapidly like a sudden rush, but soon Charles initiated a kiss, to which I responded, and our intimacy deepened. It wasn't until the following day, at approximately 3 a.m, that Victor hadn't returned. However, I anticipated his return by 7 or 8. The realization of my actions hit me, and I quickly ushered Charles out before Victor's potential arrival. I was filled with horror at the thought of cheating on my husband, wondering what Victor's reaction and response would be. All those questions kept running around in my mind. I felt so guilty, but I also felt horrified because I had enjoyed it. I was so emotionally starved that I had cheated on my husband with a young boy that was only a year older than my twins. When my husband returned from the hospital, I was overwhelmed with guilt, but I couldn't bring myself to confess because I feared he would divorce me and leave me, which was the last thing I wanted. I truly loved my husband and envisioned a lifelong commitment with him. He possessed qualities like kindness, humility, and helpfulness, but he had a strong aversion to infidelity. My husband firmly believed in open communication as the solution to relationship issues, as opposed to resorting to cheating. I put on a facade, acting as if everything was normal and that I hadn't just cheated on him hours earlier. We engaged in conversation, and Victor, who had been working all night, eventually went to rest. Afterward, I blocked Charles and sent him a concise message instructing him not to contact me again. For a few days, everything seemed to be back to normal. However, as time passed, I began to feel a growing sense of loneliness, and I realized that Charles was the only person who kept my boredom at bay. He provided entertainment, and, ashamed as I am to admit it, I missed the intimacy we shared. After struggling with my internal conflicts for several days, I eventually decided to unblock Charles. He promptly sent me a message, and we resumed our conversations. Charles managed to convince me that as long as Victor remained unaware of the affair, we would be safe, and what he didn't know wouldn't harm him. Charles reassured me that concealing the affair would be straightforward given Victor's demanding work schedule, which often extended into weekends. Furthermore, with our kids away at college, the house was typically empty except for me. Charles skillfully manipulated my perception, asserting that my actions weren't truly wrong, laying the blame on Victor for neglecting me. Regrettably, I fell under Charles's sway, and before long, we were secretly engaging in our affair within the confines of our home. Whenever Victor was absent, typically on hospital duty during weekends, Charles would visit, and our encounters became frequent and intimate. Charles also persuaded me to provide him with financial support. Despite Victor being the primary breadwinner, we maintained a joint account. Our comfortable financial situation led me to contribute money to Charles for various expenses, including gas, groceries, clothing, and more. I became so immersed in the affair, so deeply entangled, that I felt like I was losing my sense of self. Victor's sporadic and unexpected returns home should have served as a wake-up call, but I continued to dismiss them. By this point, I was so deeply ensnared by Charles that I found it impossible to extricate myself. Then, one day, as Charles and I were engaged in an intimate moment, I heard the sound of Victor's car pulling into the driveway, which came as a shock because he wasn't supposed to return home at that time. I promptly separated from Charles, hastily dressed, and tidied up the bed. I needed to conceal Charles in one of our children's rooms, given that they had departed for college, leaving their rooms mostly unused. Although these rooms still held their childhood possessions and were typically where they stayed during visits, I consistently kept them in order. Fortunately, Victor didn't consider checking the kids' room and seemed reluctant to let on that he harbored suspicions, so he behaved normally and remained home all day. Consequently, my former lover, Charles, had no option but to stay hidden in the kids' room overnight. However, the following day, after Victor had left for work, Charles emerged. Since he hadn't eaten much during his overnight stay, I allowed him to shower and share breakfast with me. Afterward, we became intimate once more. This was a significant error on my part. I should have sent Charles home after breakfast instead of engaging in further intimacy with him. It appears that Victor had developed strong suspicions because he returned home promptly and caught Charles and me in the midst of an intimate encounter. Have you ever experienced a moment where your life seemed to flash before your eyes? That's precisely what happened to me as Victor abruptly entered our marital bed and discovered Charles and me engaged in an intimate act. Impulsively, I swiftly covered myself with the bedsheets and began to cry. Charles's clothes lay on the floor and Victor seized them, adamantly withholding them from him. He then unceremoniously ejected Charles, leaving him unclothed. I stood by, witnessing the unfolding events, fully aware that I had shattered my life. Strangely, Victor didn't raise his voice or react in any way, which shook me to the core. I had hoped for some reaction, any words, even shouting, an inquiry of how could I do such a thing, anything. But nothing came. Victor disposed of Charles's clothing in the trash and left the house, despite my repeated pleas for him to return and allow me to explain. I wept incessantly, plagued by remorse. What had I wrought? My life lay in ruins, with no hope of redemption. The marriage I had fought so hard to build had disintegrated irreparably. I was acutely aware that Victor would never forgive me. I had inflicted lasting scars upon him. Victor's departure was imminent, and I realized I would be left in dire straits. I lacked independent income and assets, and I deeply regretted the choice I had made to be a stay-at-home wife over the years. Even more agonizingly, Victor wasted no time in making my transgressions public. I was further horrified by the manner in which he disclosed my betrayal and infidelity to everyone. A notification on my phone alerted me to Victor adding me to a WhatsApp group chat that included my family, our friends, and his family. It was as if I had foreseen his intentions. I urgently attempted to call him, but he steadfastly refused to answer. He proceeded to share screenshots of my messages with Charles and recorded a voice note recounting how he had entered the house and caught Charles and me in the act. My phone incessantly buzzed as my inbox flooded with messages. I received texts expressing disbelief at how I could commit such a terrible act and how I had shattered my marriage. My parents expressed profound disappointment, while my friends were both shocked and let down. Victor's family was seething with anger. Apparently, Victor didn't want our kids to learn of the situation from someone else, so he contacted them and disclosed everything. I gleaned this information because shortly afterward, my kids began calling me. Initially, I was too apprehensive to answer, but I knew my children well. Ignoring their calls would only lead them to come over to the house, and facing them in person would be even more daunting than speaking to them on the phone. Reluctantly, I picked up the phone, and my kids were utterly stunned and deeply disappointed in me. I attempted to provide them with an explanation, emphasizing how my profound loneliness had driven me to such actions, but they were not receptive. They questioned why I hadn't talked to them earlier, and I had no valid response. They informed me that Victor had been planning to retire soon, granting us ample time together. It's safe to say I had shattered my own life. My children refused to communicate with me. Both my family and Victor's were infuriated, assuming Victor and I were content together. Despite numerous attempts, Victor didn't answer my calls. So, I resorted to sending him numerous texts, explaining my actions, offering apologies, and expressing my profound loneliness. However, Victor remained resolute, acknowledging my loneliness, but revealing that he had been secretly planning his retirement to surprise me. I couldn't fathom his words. He went on to confess his suspicions of my infidelity, which prompted his random visits back home. Victor gave me just a few days to pack my belongings and vacate our house. He indicated his intention to serve me with divorce papers. Consequently, I packed my things and sought refuge at my parents' house. Despite their anger, they wouldn't abandon me in my time of need. As for Charles, he blocked me, rendering me unable to reach him. It's as if he never existed. I am acutely aware of the wrongfulness of my actions and carry deep regret. I will bear this remorse for the remainder of my life. However, I hope that by sharing my story here, someone might glean a valuable lesson from my mistakes. Thank you all for listening.
All right, that was a fun story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned and let's dive in.
I wanted to share something and seek advice from the Reddit community. My husband, 36 male, and I, 34 female, were married for 3 years, and our relationship, for the most part, remained strong. Despite facing some challenges, we consistently tackled them together. My husband had a close friend from college, whom we'll call Mark, 35M. Mark had played a significant role in my husband's life for many years, akin to that of a brother. Mark even served as the best man at our wedding, a choice I fully understood and supported. Lately, my husband's job has been demanding more of his time. During his absence, he relied on Mark to fill the void. Mark willingly stepped up to assist with various household tasks, such as repairs, maintenance, and other tasks typically requiring a man's touch. I genuinely appreciated Mark's willingness to help. He was a truly decent person. One evening, my husband once again had to work late at the office. As I was about to leave, the back door got stuck and required repairs. Given that I would be alone in the house at night, I called my husband, who mentioned he would inquire with Mark about fixing it. This didn't come as a surprise, so I agreed. I started heading upstairs for a shower but heard Mark approaching as I ascended. Instead of continuing upstairs, I decided to wait for him by our front door. He arrived, got his toolbox from his truck's trunk, and appeared particularly rugged that day, radiating a strong and attractive presence. I greeted him with a wave as he approached. I felt somewhat embarrassed about him having to help with something at our house again, but he seemed cheerful and in good spirits. I remarked, "Fixing the back door isn't really urgent. If you have plans or are busy, we can do it another time. However, he promptly replied, "No, I'm not occupied, so there's no issue." I agreed as we made our way to the back door. While he examined the door, I went upstairs to continue my shower and get ready for bed. During my shower, I suddenly recalled the possibility of leaving the stove on while cooking dinner, prompting me to go downstairs to double-check. As I descended the stairs, I heard footsteps ascending. To my surprise, it was Mark. He informed me that I had left the stove on, which he had already turned off. Our gazes met, and I leaned in, initiating a kiss. He responded, and things escalated swiftly. After our intimate encounter, he resumed fixing the back door, and I returned to my shower. In that moment, I was overwhelmed by regret. Days went by, and everything appeared normal between my husband and me. I hadn't seen Mark since that night. Then, one Saturday, my husband and I were scheduled to attend a gathering with his college friends. Everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves, including my conversations with some of the girls. Unexpectedly, my husband approached me and insisted we were leaving immediately. I was taken aback, initially thinking he was joking, but his serious demeanor prompted me to stand up. During our journey home, I repeatedly inquired about what was wrong, but he remained silent, regardless of my words. Upon entering our house, he headed straight for our bedroom, emptied my clothes from the cabinets, and confronted me. He stated that he knew everything, that Mark had divulged all the details of that night. He emphasized that cheating was bad enough, but betraying him with his closest friend was unforgivable. He declared he didn't want to see me anymore and insisted that I leave right then and there. I felt utterly lost and had no choice but to pack my bags. Can anyone offer advice on how to proceed? I'm willing to do whatever it takes to mend my marriage, but I'm completely bewildered and don't know where to begin. Any guidance would be greatly appreciated. I appreciate all the advice, but it's been nearly a month and my life has been nothing but misery. I made every effort, even pleaded with my husband for another chance, but he's completely done with me. He refuses to communicate, and I've said all I can. I had a one-time encounter with Mark, and I regretted it the moment it ended. However, my husband had already cut me off from his life. He's determined to proceed with the divorce. I'm still lost and uncertain about what to do. I hope my husband will come to his senses and recognize that I deserve a second chance. 3 months have passed, and everything has taken a turn for the worse. I'm willing to accept that I deserve the consequences. My friends have gradually distanced themselves from me after learning about the situation. Despite my attempts to explain, they sided with my husband and judged me solely for one mistake. I understand their anger, but I can't comprehend why they harbor such intense resentment towards me. My husband is proceeding with the divorce despite my countless pleas for forgiveness. I acknowledge my mistake, one I would never repeat, but divorcing me and discarding all our years together feels excessively harsh. I had been a great wife to him, yet one error made it seem as if I were the worst person he had ever encountered. My ex-husband and Mark continued to be best friends, which I find unbelievable. Mark and I had an intimate encounter, a mutual choice made by 2 consenting adults. We both made a mistake. But why am I the only one facing consequences while he maintains a friendship with my ex-husband? The whole situation is baffling, and I doubt I'll ever move beyond it. I recognize that I deserve the consequences, but how can I come to terms with who I am and my current circumstances? I'm starting a new chapter of my life in a different state, distancing myself from those who rejected me. I'll always remember how they treated me, but I'll use that experience as motivation to strive for self-improvement. Clearly, this is a throwaway account, but here's my story. I'm a married woman who's involved with a married man. I remained faithful for 15 years, but my husband lost all interest in intimacy. Regardless of my efforts or attempts, he simply wasn't interested. I'm in good shape, take great care of myself, and I'm considered above average in terms of looks. I made attempts to convince my husband to see a doctor, but he adamantly refuses. He's physically capable but lacks interest. I understand it's not personal, but the repeated rejection took a toll on me. I began to feel unattractive and fell into a state of depression. I contemplated leaving, but I didn't want to put my kids through that. Then, one night the kids were at my mom's, and I decided to surprise my husband with new lingerie. I put it on and sat beside him on the couch. He ignored me and asked me to move because he was watching TV and I was in his way. He didn't even notice the $100 corset and underwear I had purchased from Victoria's Secret, which I had been saving for a special kid-free night. That was the breaking point. I locked myself in the bathroom and cried for an hour. After he went to bed, completely oblivious to my tears and emotional turmoil, I went online and created an Ashley Madison profile. I used a bikini picture from our vacation but blurred out my face. I instantly garnered attention. It was a tremendous ego boost not to feel invisible, to be wanted and desired. For about a month, I merely chatted and flirted. After another month of enduring rejection and sexual frustration, I decided to take things further. I arranged meetings with a couple of guys at Starbucks on separate occasions, but there were no sparks, and I was quite selective, so I politely declined further involvement. I started requesting more pictures and eventually met up with a man who was traveling for business. He was enjoyable but essentially just a one-time experience. It did boost my self-esteem and provided some relief from my sexual frustration. At this point, I wasn't actively seeking anything, but then I received a message from another member who caught my attention. We engaged in intermittent chats for a couple of weeks before meeting in person. Upon meeting him, I was immediately drawn to him. He seemed perfect and was in a situation identical to mine. His wife had essentially conveyed her disinterest in sexual intimacy. She would engage if he insisted, but it always felt like she was doing it as a favor. We hit it off and decided to maintain a purely sexual relationship. We meet once a week at various hotels or in his office after work hours. The intimacy has been and continues to be extraordinary, the best either of us has ever experienced. We've explored every desire and fantasy we ever had. We've been involved in this arrangement for about a year now. Despite the potential for us to fall in love and start a new life together, neither of us wishes to disrupt our respective families. I still have love for my husband. However, he's unable to meet my needs. If it weren't for my affair, I might have considered divorce by now. My lover fills a void and enables me to maintain my marriage. Surprisingly, my relationship with my husband has actually improved since I no longer hold as much resentment or anger towards him. It feels strange to share this, knowing that some may label me negatively, but unless you've walked in my shoes, it's hard to grasp. For me, this is the solution that allows me to keep my family intact. There was something missing in my life, causing misery and sadness. I filled the void in my marriage with someone else. It's not ideal. I wish my husband could provide what I need and would seek medical advice, but he either can't or won't. His refusal to have his testosterone levels checked or make a doctor's appointment reflects his lack of concern for my satisfaction or my feelings. I bear no guilt. I'm doing what's necessary to preserve my family for the sake of my kids. In terms of our compatibility and the life we've built together, I'm genuinely content with my marriage. I understand that divorce wouldn't necessarily make me happier or better off. I envision our marriage like a 100-piece puzzle with 99 pieces perfectly assembled. I had to find that missing piece elsewhere or contemplate starting over entirely. I'm not willing to discard the other 99 pieces, so I do what I must.